Miter joints. Most of us are familiar with these. They call it a picture frame joint or a corner joint, 45-degree joint, and they're easy to make on the bandsaw. And here's how to do the basic, simple, plain miter joint on a bandsaw. The next easy joint is the miter joint, and for that you need to set your box to 45 degrees. Unless it's indexed, it's worthwhile double checking with a square. And that's 45 degrees. Much the same as a butt joint, and it's on a 45-degree angle. And there's your miter joint. That's used for frames, pictures, whatever. And there it is. Bit of a downside with the miter joint is it's not the strongest because it's got end grain on end grain, and that really constitutes a weak joint. So to strengthen the miter joint, what we can do is make a keyed miter joint. And here's a key miter joint. And this is the procedure of making a key miter joint on the bandsaw. To get a keyed miter, what we need is a little slot here, so when the miter is together, we can then put in a thin piece of veneer on the corner here, which will give us a nice keyed joint. Set your marking gauge for the middle of the timber, make a mark, and then make a mark from both sides, both faces. The reason for that is if the timber's a little bit thicker, or if your marking gauge is a little bit out, by marking at both sides, you will then get either one reference line or two reference lines very close together. Then you line that up against your blade, so the blade is running either straight between those lines or splitting the marking line you've got, so we know we're getting dead centre. Work out how deep you want the keys. For me, I'll just draw a line on here and we'll see how we go. And that's how deep the keys will come in when it's put together as a joint. With the timber upwards and the face of the miter on the table, just saw up to that mark that you've made there. Like that. Turn it around, and with this edge flat on the table, just go in again. Up until the end of that cut. What that does, it evens it out in case you're a little bit off centre. If you're a little bit off centre when you put the joint together, it's not going to meet on the faces. But by doing that, you'll bring it into alignment and the faces will marry up perfectly. And do the same with the second bit. Now that has got two equal key slots, and when we put it together, they line up perfectly. Next step is to glue this miter, and then when it's glued, I'll show you how to fit the key and trim it to size. Now that keyed miter joint is glued, just make sure there's no glue actually in the slot, and if you've got a piece of scrap veneer, you can just glue it into the slot like that, and then when it's dry, you break it off. If you don't have a piece of veneer, that's fine. Grab a spare bit of timber. It doesn't matter, it can be contrasting, it can be complementary, it could be the same timber, and then just cut off a very thin slither on the saw, and that will go in there quite nicely as well. And then when it's dry, you just clean up the edges. There it is, all finished. And it's reasonably strong, depending how big a key you put in, or depending how big a section of timber you're actually putting the key into. But to really make a strong miter joint, you need a spline. And this is the splined miter joint. You can tell it's got a decent spline in it. Now I used a contrasting timber because I wanted to make a feature out of it. If you wanted to make it look as if it was a mortise and tenon or a bridle miter joint, you would use the same timber and orientate the grain accordingly. But I wanted this to be a bit of a feature, so I used a red timber.